She was the woman who refilled the coffee. That was how they saw her, if they saw her at all. Lena Marsh had worked at Caldwell Distribution for 6 years. 6 years of early mornings, of pushing a service cart down corridors that smelled like printer toner and ambition. 6 years of watching people rush past her without making eye contact, the way you look through a window without really seeing the glass. She didn't mind, or rather, she had made peace with it a long time ago. What they didn't know, what no one had ever thought to ask, was that Lena noticed everything. She noticed which regional managers came in early, and which ones arrived 5 minutes before the 9 o'clock stand-up, just to be seen walking in with purpose. She noticed which departments were ordering replacement packaging twice a month when once should have been enough. She noticed the loading dock crew on the night shift moving 30% slower on Tuesdays. Not out of laziness, but because their shift changeover overlapped with the truck arrivals from the eastern routes, and nobody had ever adjusted the schedule to account for it. She noticed because she was there when no one else was paying attention. Lena had grown up in Sudbury, Ontario, in a house where the furnace worked only sometimes and the kitchen table doubled as a homework desk. Her mother worked dispatch for a small freight company, and her father drove long haul. She had grown up knowing the language of logistics before she knew it had a name. What her parents called making things work, the rest of the world eventually started calling supply chain optimization. She had taken 2 semesters of business at Laurentian before the money ran out and her father got sick. She went home. She found work. She kept learning on her own. Textbooks from the library, free online courses after midnight when the apartment was quiet, industry reports she bookmarked and read on her lunch break while everyone else was scrolling their phones. At Caldwell, she started in the mailroom, then facilities. Now she was in building services, which was a polite way of saying she was the person who made sure the boardroom table was clean before the executives sat down at it. She was good at her job. She was also quietly good at theirs. The notebook lived in the front pocket of her cart, tucked beside the extra rolls of paper towel. A small thing, blue cover, the elastic holding it shut stretched thin from years of use. She had started it in her 3rd month at Caldwell, jotting down observations the way some people doodle. Almost involuntarily, because her brain kept finding patterns and needed somewhere to put them. By the time she had been there 3 years, the notebook had company. A USB drive she carried on her keychain. A spreadsheet she updated at home, cross-referencing her own observations with the quarterly reports the company posted publicly on its investor relations page. It was not insider information. It was just attention. Sustained, careful, unglamorous attention. The kind nobody ever gave her credit for because nobody knew she was doing it. She wasn't doing it for credit. She wasn't even sure what she was doing it for. Until the morning, everything changed. It started with the Hartwell contract. Hartwell Grocery was Caldwell's largest client, a regional chain with 83 locations across Ontario and Manitoba, the kind of account that made up nearly a quarter of the company's annual revenue. Caldwell had held the contract for 11 years. It was, as the VP of Operations liked to say at the all-hands meetings, the bedrock of this company's stability. The bedrock was cracking. Lena heard about it the way she heard about most things, not through official channels but through proximity. She was wiping down the credenza outside the second-floor boardroom when the door opened and 3 senior managers came out mid-conversation. The way people do when the meeting runs long and the hallway becomes an extension of the room. If we lose Hartwell, we're looking at restructuring by Q3. We're not going to lose Hartwell. David, their renewal meeting is in 6 weeks. We don't have a proposal that's going to impress them. Our delivery times are 3% worse than they were 2 years ago, and we haven't offered them anything new. The door closed behind them. The hallway went quiet. Lena finished wiping down the credenza. She thought about that conversation for the rest of the day. She thought about it on the bus ride home. She thought about it while she made dinner. Pasta with whatever was left in the fridge, a habit from childhood that she had never bothered to outgrow. She opened her laptop and pulled up the Hartwell file she had been keeping for almost a year. Not because she'd known this moment was coming. Just because Hartwell was interesting, and her brain liked interesting things. What she had was this. Hartwell's busiest stores were not where Caldwell thought they were. The company's delivery routing prioritized Hartwell's larger urban locations, downtown Toronto, Mississauga, Scarborough, because those were the flagship stores, the ones that appeared in press releases. But the actual volume, the consistent week-over-week movement of product, was happening in the mid-sized stores in places like Barrie, Guelph, Sudbury, Thunder Bay. Places that Caldwell was servicing with leftover scheduling slots, the routes nobody else wanted. She had the numbers. She had mapped it across 14 months of public inventory disclosures, cross-checked against the delivery windows she had overheard discussed in facilities meetings, layered against weather delay patterns from the previous 2 winters. The picture was clear, at least to her. Caldwell was optimizing for prestige. Hartwell needed reliability. Those were not the same thing. She closed the laptop. She sat with it for a long time. Then she opened the laptop again and started to write. She didn't tell anyone. That was not a decision so much as a habit. Lena had learned early at Caldwell that unsolicited opinions from the building services team were received with a particular kind of polite dismissal. The smile that didn't reach the eyes, the thanks for sharing that meant the exact opposite of thank you. She had tried once, in her 2nd year, to mention to a floor supervisor that the receiving bay process was creating a bottleneck that backed up into the loading schedule. He had nodded slowly and then not done anything, and 2 weeks later a manager from logistics had come down to troubleshoot the exact same issue, and he had gotten a commendation at the quarterly meeting. She was not bitter about this. She had simply stopped offering opinions. But the Hartwell situation was different. She knew it was different. She just didn't know what to do with that knowledge. She kept working on the proposal. She had started calling it that, in her head, through the following weeks. She refined her numbers. She anticipated objections. She read everything she could find about Hartwell's public-facing strategy, their press releases, a speech their CEO had given at a retail conference in Calgary that was posted on YouTube. She learned what they cared about. She built the proposal around what they actually needed, not what Caldwell assumed they needed. It was the best work she had ever done. She had no idea what to do with it. The all-staff email came on a Thursday morning. It was from Neil Okafor, Caldwell's chief operating officer. Short, carefully worded in the way that important emails always are. The kind where you can feel the legal team in every sentence. As many of you are aware, Caldwell is in the process of renewing our partnership with Hartwell Grocery. This is a significant moment for our company, and we want to approach it with the full weight of our collective knowledge and experience. To that end, we are opening the floor. Any employee at any level who has ideas, analysis, or perspective relevant to the Hartwell renewal is encouraged to submit a proposal to the operations team by the end of next week. All submissions will be reviewed. The best ideas will be brought forward regardless of where they come from. She read it twice, then a 3rd time. Any employee at any level. She thought about the floor supervisor and his commendation. She thought about 6 years of being invisible. She thought about the notebook in her cart and the USB drive on her keychain and the 14 months of data that lived in a spreadsheet on her personal laptop. She thought about her mother, who had driven dispatch for 30 years and known every route in northern Ontario by heart, and who had once said, in that matter-of-fact way she had of saying important things, "The work doesn't do itself, Lena, and nobody's going to ask you to do it. You just do it, or you don't." She submitted the proposal on Friday afternoon. She used her personal email address. She attached the spreadsheet and the written analysis. 12 pages, single-spaced, with 3 appendices. She spent 40 minutes on the subject line before settling on something simple. Hartwell Renewal. A proposal from Building Services. Then she went back to her cart and finished her shift. She didn't hear anything for 8 days. She told herself this was expected. Dozens of proposals had probably come in. Neil Okafor's team had real work to do. She was not going to check her email every 20 minutes. She checked her email every 20 minutes. On the 9th day, she came in to find a message from an address she didn't recognize, an internal Caldwell address she had never seen before, belonging to someone named G. Whitmore, executive assistant to the COO. The message was 4 sentences long. "Ms. Marsh, thank you for your submission regarding the Hartwell renewal. Mr. Okafor found your analysis compelling and would like to discuss it with you directly. Are you available Thursday at 2 o'clock? Please confirm at your earliest convenience." She read it in the supply closet where she kept her cart overnight. She said out loud to no one, "Oh." She almost didn't go, not out of fear, exactly. Something more complicated than fear, the specific anxiety of someone who has spent years being overlooked suddenly being asked to step into the light and not being entirely sure the floor will hold. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She had done the work. The work was good. That was what mattered. She pressed her uniform the night before. She practiced what she would say. She arrived at the executive floor 12 minutes early and sat in the reception area and looked at her hands. Neil Okafor came out to get her himself. She hadn't expected that. She had expected the assistant, or maybe an assistant to the assistant. But Neil Okafor walked out of his office and across the reception area and extended his hand and said, "Lena, I'm glad you came. I've been looking forward to this." He was younger than she'd imagined. Mid-40s maybe, with the kind of calm that comes from either enormous confidence or enormous practice at appearing confident. She had seen him at all-hands meetings, at a distance, a figure at a podium. Up close, he was just a person. She shook his hand. "Thank you for the invitation," she said, because she was not going to say I almost didn't come. His office had windows that faced north toward the lake. There was a second person already seated inside, a woman Lena recognized as Diane Rupert, Caldwell's VP of Client Strategy, someone whose name appeared on the contracts that Lena occasionally pushed past on her cart. Diane Rupert looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral and not quite warm. "Monsieur Marsh," she said, "I've read your proposal. I hope it was useful," Lena said. "It was thorough," Diane said. The word landed in a way that wasn't entirely a compliment. Neil pulled out a chair and gestured for Lena to sit, and she sat, and they had questions. She had answers. Not performed answers. She wasn't reciting memorized lines. She actually knew this material. She had lived with it for 14 months. When Diane asked about the traffic pattern analysis for the northern routes, Lena pulled up the spreadsheet on the laptop she'd brought and walked her through it, column by column, without hesitating. When Neil asked how she had gotten the regional inventory figures, she explained her methodology clearly. Public disclosures, cross-reference with logistics industry benchmarks, adjusted for the specific weather delay patterns she had tracked from Transport Canada data. At one point, Diane said, "You built this from publicly available information?" "Yes," Lena said. "On your own time?" "Yes." Diane looked at Neil. Something passed between them that Lena couldn't quite read. She kept going. She talked about the mid-market stores, about the reliability gap, about the specific scheduling adjustments that would improve on-time delivery by an estimated 11% without adding significant cost. She talked about what Hartwell actually needed versus what Caldwell had been assuming they needed. She laid it out clearly, with evidence, without apology. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. Neil Okafor leaned back in his chair and looked at her the way people sometimes look at something they are deciding whether to trust. "How long have you been with Caldwell?" he asked. 6 years, she said. And before that, she told him about Sudbury, about Laurentian, about her parents. She told it plainly, without framing it as either a hardship story or a triumph, just the sequence of things that had happened and how she had moved through them. He nodded slowly. "I grew up in Windsor," he said. "My mother cleaned offices. I used to go with her sometimes when I was small and she would let me push the cart." Lena looked at him. "I'm not telling you that to make a point," he said. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that I am not confused about what you've done here or what it took." She wasn't sure what to say to that. So she said nothing, and he seemed to understand that too. 2 days later, she was called back. This time the meeting was larger. The proposal, her proposal, with her name on it, was on the table in printed copies. There were 6 people in the room. One of them, she learned when she sat down, was Robert Calloway, Caldwell's chief executive officer. She had never been in the same room as Robert Calloway before. He was a tall man, late 50s, silver-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who had made a lot of decisions and was no longer anxious about making them. He looked at her when she came in with a directness that she found steadying rather than intimidating. It meant he was taking her seriously. She could work with that. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "I've read your analysis twice. I'd like you to walk us through it." So she did. She presented the whole thing, the data, the routing model, the scheduling proposal, the projected improvement figures. She answered every question. She pushed back, gently but clearly, when one of the senior managers suggested that her northern route analysis might be overstating the volume discrepancy. She had the numbers. She walked him through them. He conceded the point. Afterward, Robert Calloway asked her to stay while the others filed out. She sat across from him in the emptying boardroom, her laptop open in front of her, and waited. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not the way you think I want to be answered." "All right," she said. "Why did you do this? You could have kept your head down for another 6 years. Most people in your position would have. What made you put this together and send it in?" She thought about the honest answer. Then she gave it. "Because I knew the company was going to lose Hartwell," she said. "And I knew I could see something that wasn't being seen. And I thought, if I don't say something and we lose that contract and 200 people lose their jobs, that's something I'd have to live with. So I said something." He was quiet for a moment. "Not for recognition," he said. "It wasn't quite a question. I didn't think I'd get any," she said. "That's not the same thing as not wanting it." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, something more considered than a smile. "No," he said, "it's not. What came next did not happen overnight." She wants to be clear about that, because the story, when people eventually told it, had a tendency to compress into something more dramatic and instantaneous than it actually was. There was no single moment where a door swung open and everything changed. There was a process, and the process was slow, and parts of it were uncomfortable. What happened first was that Neil Okafor called her into his office the following Monday and told her that the Hartwell proposal was going to be incorporated into the renewal pitch, with her credited as the primary analyst. He asked if she was willing to be present at the client meeting. She said yes. The Hartwell meeting was in a boardroom in Etobicoke on a Tuesday in November when the lake effect snow was coming in sideways off Lake Ontario. She sat at the end of the table in a blazer she had bought the previous Saturday at a consignment store on Bank Street. Good wool, barely worn, the kind of thing someone else had bought for an important meeting years ago. She thought about that person sometimes. She hoped the meeting had gone well for them. It went well for Lena. She didn't lead the presentation. That was Diane and Neil, as it should have been. But when the questions came, the specific, detailed questions about routing and scheduling and the northern market analysis, Neil turned to her and said, "Lena can speak to this," and she spoke to it. Afterward, the Hartwell team lead, a careful woman named Susan, who wore her reading glasses on a chain, stopped Lena in the lobby. "The northern route data," she said. "That was yours." "Yes," Lena said. Susan nodded. "It matched something we've been telling Caldwell for 2 years," she said. "Nobody ever brought data." Hartwell signed the renewal, 3 years, expanded terms, a new pilot program for the northern routes. The weeks after that were strange. People at Caldwell knew. Not everyone, and not all at once, but word moved the way word always moves in a workplace, selectively, with embellishments shaped by whoever was telling it. Some versions were generous. Some versions were the kind that made her accomplishment into a curiosity. A fun fact, the woman from building services who turned out to have a secret spreadsheet. She ignored those versions. She had practice ignoring things. What she could not ignore and didn't want to was the conversation Neil Okafor asked her to have with him in HR in early December. "We'd like to create a role for you," he said, formally, "in operations." She looked at him. "What kind of role?" He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. She read it. The title was Route Optimization Analyst. The salary was more than she had made in her last 3 years of building services combined. There was a note at the bottom, handwritten in Neil's careful script. "This is a start, not a ceiling." She took a breath. "I'd need to think about it," she said. "Of course," he said. She thought about it for approximately 4 hours. Then she called him back and said yes. Her first day in operations, she came in at 7:15 and found her desk, a real desk, with a monitor and a phone and a nameplate that said Lena Marsh Route Optimization, and she sat down and looked at it for a long moment. The view from her new window faced south. She could see the loading dock from here. She could see the trucks coming and going, the crew moving between bays, the whole physical machinery of the company's daily work. She had watched it for years from down there. She could still read it. She could see, even from here, that Bay 3 was running behind because the overnight truck from Barrie was late, and the supervisor was compensating by pulling a loader from Bay 1, which was going to create a different problem in about 40 minutes. She made a note. She would mention it at the 9 o'clock stand-up. Old habits. There was a mug on her desk that she didn't recognize. A Caldwell-branded mug with a sticky note attached. She peeled off the note. It said in handwriting she didn't recognize, "Welcome to the team. We heard you like coffee." She held the note for a second. Then she laughed, a short, real laugh, the kind that surprises you. She made herself coffee. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. There was a lot of work to do, and she had already been thinking about it for 6 years. She was ready.